Did you know that B.F. Skinner, Jean Piaget, Sigmund Freud, Albert Bandura, Leon Festinger, Carl Rogers, Stanley Schachter, Neal Miller, Edward Thorndike, and Abraham Maslow are the top 10 most eminent psychologists of the 20th century? This ranking was established by a 2002 study conducted by the American Psychological Association and was based on journal citations, introductions in textbooks, and surveys. In this video, we will briefly explain the key theories, discoveries, and contributions that made these 10 psychologists so influential in shaping modern psychology. B.F. Skinner.
B.F. Skinner was an American psychologist who proposed several theories that have shaped our understanding of learning and behavior today. One of Skinner's most influential theories is operant conditioning, which states that behavior is shaped through reinforcement or punishment. Skinner believed that behaviors followed by positive or pleasurable outcomes would be repeated, while those which result in negative outcomes would decrease in frequency. He distinguished between positive reinforcement, adding a rewarding stimulus like praise to encourage actions, and negative reinforcement, removing an aversive one like stopping a loud noise to promote compliance. Punishment, conversely, could involve adding discomfort or removing privileges to deter unwanted behaviors. He created the Skinner box, a device used to study operant conditioning. It consists of a chamber with sensors and a lever or button for the subjects to press. The subjects were usually lab rats. When the sensor is triggered, a reinforcer, for example, food, or a punishment, for example, an electric shock, is delivered to induce a particular behavior from the subject. Skinner also proposed the concept of behavioral shaping, which states that behaviors can be shaped gradually by reinforcing progressively more complex behaviors. This process can teach animals and humans new behaviors through positive reinforcement. For instance, in Skinner's pigeon experiments, a pigeon could be trained to turn in a full circle by initially reinforcing any slight turn to the left, such as a small head movement in that direction. Then only larger turns were reinforced, like a quarter turn, and finally rewarding only complete 360-degree rotations, thereby shaping the full circling behavior step by step. Skinner also developed the idea of schedules of reinforcement, which refers to the timing and frequency of reinforcements given for particular behaviors. He found that varying the pattern of rewards could affect an animal's learning rate and motivation. He proposed 4 types of reinforcement schedules: fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, and variable interval. In a fixed ratio schedule, the animal receives a pellet of food after pushing the trigger a certain number of times. In a variable ratio schedule, an animal receives reinforcement after a random number of responses. In a fixed interval schedule, animals are given a pellet after a designated period of time has elapsed, such as every 5 minutes. In a variable interval schedule, animals receive a reinforcer at random. Among the reinforcement schedules, variable ratio is the most productive and the most resistant to extinction. In operant conditioning, extinction is the fading of non-reinforced conditioned response over time. B.F. Skinner was born in 1904 and passed away in 1990 at the age of 86.
Jean Piaget.
Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist and philosopher who developed one of the most influential theories in modern psychology, cognitive development. The theory describes how children develop intellectually over time and proposes 4 stages: sensoromotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. The sensoromotor stage, from birth to age 2, is the earliest stage of cognitive development and focuses on physical activities involving manipulating objects and understanding the environment through sensory information. In this stage, children make use of skills and abilities they were born with, such as sucking, grasping, looking, and listening. One of the most important cognitive developments a child accomplishes is that of object permanence. Object permanence is a child's ability to understand that objects continue to exist even they cannot be seen or heard. The pre-operational stage, from age 2 to age 7, is characterized by the development of language and symbolic understanding, often through pretend play. Children in this stage begin to use logic and can form mental images and symbols and think abstractly. Role-playing become important at this stage, with children playing characters such as Doctor, Mommy, and Daddy. One of the most important mental abilities that children develop at this stage is egocentrism. Egocentrism refers to the child's inability to understand that someone's point of view or opinion might be different than their own. The concrete operational stage, from age 7 to 11, marks an important transition in the children's cognitive development as they become more aware of abstract concepts and can logically solve problems. Children develop skills such as classification, seriation, and spatial reasoning during this stage. Two important cognitive developments that happen at this stage are the children's understanding of reversibility and conservation. By reversibility, it is understood the fact that actions can be reversed, such as reversing the order of relationship between mental categories. For example, a husky is a dog, and dogs are animals. Conservation refers to the understanding that when something changes in shape or appearance, it is still the same. For example, if something is broken down in smaller pieces, it is still the same amount as when the object was a whole, say a full pizza sliced in 8 pieces. The formal operational stage, from age 11 and beyond, is characterized by abstract thinking and the ability to reason logically about hypothetical concepts. At this stage, teenagers gain a better understanding of theoretical and hypothetical problems and an increased capacity for abstract thought. They can also think logically about complex problems, organize information systematically, and draw conclusions. Jean Piaget was born in 1896 and passed away in 1980 at the age of 84.
Sigmund Freud.
Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis. His main theories and concepts include the unconscious mind, free association, dream interpretation, psychosexual development, ego defense mechanisms, and psychotherapy. The unconscious mind is a concept that Freud developed to explain how thoughts, feelings, and impulses can be hidden from conscious awareness. According to Freud, the unconscious mind contains all our repressed memories, desires, and instinctual drives inaccessible to conscious thought. Freud later expanded this with his structural model, the id, our primitive instincts, the ego, our rational self, and the superego, our moral standards. They interact to shape behavior amid internal conflicts. Freud believed that dream interpretation was key to understanding the unconscious mind. He argued that all dreams are expressions of repressed desires, fears, and anxieties. He developed a technique known as the dream work theory, which involves looking at the symbols and metaphors found in dreams to gain insight into what they mean and how they relate to our waking lives. He distinguished between manifest content, or the remembered storyline, and latent content, or the symbolic, hidden meaning of the dream. Freud's psychosexual development theory outlines the stages of psychological development during childhood. He argued that sexuality is the primary motivating force of psychological development and proposed 5 stages of sexual development: oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Unresolved conflicts at any stage can lead to fixation, influencing adult personality. For example, oral fixation from birth to 1-year-old might manifest as overeating or dependency, while anal fixation from 1 to 3 years old could result in obsessiveness or messiness. The phallic stage, from 3 to 6 years old, involves the Oedipus complex, which shapes gender identity. Freud's ego defense mechanisms are coping strategies used by the ego to protect against anxiety and other negative emotions. These include denial, repression, rationalization, displacement, projection, identification, reaction formation, and sublimation. Freud developed many techniques to help his patients cope with their psychological issues, such as free association, dream interpretation, and ego defense mechanisms. Freud's free association technique is a method of uncovering the contents of the unconscious mind. During free association, patients are asked to relax and speak freely without censoring their thoughts or feelings. He believed that talking about one's feelings and experiences could lead to insight into underlying mental processes and ultimately lead to symptom relief. Sigmund Freud was born in 1856 in Freiburg, in the Austrian Empire, and passed away in 1939 in London, England, at the age of 83.
Albert Bandura.
Albert Bandura, a Canadian-American psychologist, revolutionized the field of psychology with his groundbreaking work on social learning and human behavior. Albert Bandura developed a social learning theory that has been used to explain and understand human behavior for decades. In his theory, Bandura states that people learn by observing others. This means that individuals can learn new behaviors, attitudes, and skills simply by watching what other people do or say. Unlike traditional behaviorist views who emphasize direct reinforcement, Bandura's approach bridged behaviorism and cognitive psychology by highlighting the role of vicarious learning, where observation alone could shape actions without personal trial and error. Bandura proposed 4 main processes by which people learn from one another: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. Attention is how an individual becomes aware of the model behavior or message, influenced by factors like the model's attractiveness or the salience of the action. Retention involves storing and remembering what has been observed, often through mental rehearsal or symbolic coding. Reproduction is the ability to perform a task after observing it, either consciously or unconsciously, requiring both physical capability and cognitive processing. Finally, motivation exists when individuals are driven to imitate behavior that was seen to achieve a desired outcome, such as rewards or avoidance of punishment. Bandura's theory suggests that the environment plays an important role in learning. He states that the environment provides cues and incentives which can shape behavior, creating a reciprocal determinism where personal factors, behavior, and the environment all interact dynamically. One of Bandura's most famous contributions was the Bobo doll experiment, conducted in the 1960s, which empirically demonstrated social learning. In this study, children observed adults aggressively interacting with an inflatable Bobo doll, punching, kicking, and verbally abusing it. When later placed in a room with the doll, the children imitated the aggressive behaviors, especially if the model had been rewarded. Bandura's work extended to the concept of self-efficacy, introduced in the 1970s, which refers to one's belief in their ability to succeed in specific situations. High self-efficacy leads to greater motivation, resilience, and achievement, while low self-efficacy can hinder performance. This idea has applications in education, health, and therapy, helping individuals overcome phobias or build confidence through mastery experiences, vicarious successes, verbal persuasion, and emotional regulation. Albert Bandura was born in 1925 in Mundare in Alberta, Canada, and passed away in 2021 in Stanford, California, at the age of 95.
Leon Festinger. Leon Festinger is an American social psychologist who is renowned for developing cognitive dissonance theory in 1957. This foundational concept in psychology posits that humans have an innate drive to maintain consistency among their beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. When inconsistencies arise, termed cognitive dissonance, individuals experience psychological discomfort akin to mental tension or stress. This discomfort motivates them to restore harmony by altering their thoughts, actions, or perceptions. For instance, if a person values health but continues smoking, the conflict between their belief, smoking is harmful, and behavior, I smoke, daily creates dissonance, prompting potential changes like quitting or rationalizing the habit. At its core, the theory explains how people strive for internal equilibrium. Festinger emphasized that dissonance isn't just a fleeting annoyance, but it can profoundly influence decision-making and personal growth. The adjustment process often leads to increased motivation as individuals actively seek resolution. Festinger highlighted that the magnitude of dissonance depends on the importance individuals assign to the conflicting elements. Highly valued beliefs amplify discomfort, while minor inconsistencies are easier to overlook. He argued that humans can tolerate low-level dissonance without immediate action, as long as it doesn't threaten core identities or values. This tolerance explains why people might hold contradictory views on non-essential matters, like preferring eco-friendly products but occasionally using single-use plastics without significant distress. However, when dissonance escalates, perhaps due to public commitment or high stakes, motivation to resolve it intensifies. To reduce dissonance, Festinger outlined several strategies. First, individuals might change their behavior to align with beliefs, such as adopting a new habit. Second, they could modify their attitudes or cognitions, like downplaying the importance of the conflicting belief. Third, adding new consonant information helps justify the inconsistency. For smokers, this might involve seeking studies minimizing risks. Alternatively, people may trivialize or ignore the dissonance altogether, selectively focusing on supportive evidence. These mechanisms were vividly demonstrated in Festinger's 1956 seminal study, When Prophecy Fails, co-authored with Henry Rieken and Stanley Schachter. They infiltrated a doomsday cult predicting the world's end. When the prophecy failed, Members didn't abandon their faith. Instead, they reduced dissonance by proselytizing more aggressively, claiming their devotion had saved the planet. Overall, cognitive dissonance theory underscores that discomfort isn't merely negative, but rather a catalyst for evolution in thought and action, promoting resilience and self-improvement in an inconsistent world. Leon Festinger was born in 1919 in Brooklyn, in New York, and passed away in 1989 in New York City at the age of 69. Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was an American psychologist and one of the founders of humanistic psychology. He developed his own theories about therapy and personality development, which have strongly influenced psychology today. Rogers' most important contributions are his person-centered theory and client-centered therapy. The person-centered theory is focused on three core concepts: self-actualization, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding. Self-actualization is a concept introduced by Abraham Maslow in his hierarchy of needs, which states that people strive to reach their full potential. Unconditional positive regard refers to the idea that we must treat all individuals with respect and acceptance regardless of their behavior. And empathic understanding is the ability to understand and accept another person's perspective. Rogers believed these elements form the foundation for healthy personality development, emphasizing the individual's innate tendency toward growth when provided with a supportive environment. Rogers grew up in a strict religious household, which initially shaped his views but later led him to rebel against rigid doctrines. He pursued studies in agriculture before switching to psychology, earning his PhD from Columbia University in 1931. His early career involved working with delinquent children, where he observed the limitations of directive therapies like psychoanalysis. This experience prompted him to develop a more humanistic approach, shifting focus from the therapist's expertise to the client's self-directed healing. Rogers' client-centered therapy is based on his person-centered theory concepts. It emphasizes a non-directive approach to therapy, with the therapist acting as a facilitator rather than an expert or authority figure. This form of therapy encourages the client to explore their feelings and beliefs without judgment or criticism from the therapist. A key innovation was Rogers' emphasis on the therapeutic relationship itself as the catalyst for change. He introduced the idea of congruence, where the therapist is genuine and transparent, fostering trust. This contrasted sharply with Freudian methods, prioritizing empathy over interpretation. Empirical support came from Rogers' own research, including recordings of therapy sessions, which demonstrated improved outcomes when clients felt truly heard. Today, Carl Rogers' theories are still widely used in psychotherapy and counseling. His person-centered theory is especially influential and has been adapted by many therapists. Therapy is based on the idea that an individual's capacity for self-actualization can be facilitated by providing a safe and accepting environment, with the therapist listening attentively to the client without judgment or agenda. Critics argue his theory overlooks biological factors or severe pathologies, but its emphasis on human potential remains a counterbalance to deterministic views. A 2002 study conducted by the American Psychological Association ranked Carl Rogers as the sixth most eminent psychologist of the 20th century based on journal citations, introductions in textbooks, and surveys. Carl Rogers was born in 1902 in Oak Park in Illinois and passed away in 1987 in La Jolla, California at the age of 85. Stanley Schachter. American psychologist Stanley Schachter transformed our understanding of human emotion through his two-factor theory of emotion, developed with Jerome E. Singer in 1962. This theory proposed that emotions are not merely automatic responses to bodily sensations, but the result of two interacting processes: physiological arousal and cognitive labeling. Together, these components explain how people interpret and experience emotion in different contexts, emphasizing the vital role of thought in shaping feelings. According to Schachter, the first process, physiological arousal, refers to the body's physical response to stimuli. When we encounter an emotionally charged situation, our body reacts. Our heart rate rises, breathing quickens, and adrenaline flows. Yet, physiological arousal alone does not define emotion. A racing heartbeat could indicate fear, excitement, or anger, depending on how it is interpreted. This ambiguity led Schachter to highlight the second process, cognitive labeling, which involves identifying the source of our arousal and assigning it an emotional meaning based on context and past experiences. In Schachter's view, emotion arises only when both processes work together. A person must first experience physiological arousal and then cognitively interpret that arousal to produce an emotional state. For example, imagine walking through a dark alley and hearing footsteps behind you. Your heart races and muscles tense. This is the physiological arousal. When your mind interprets this arousal as fear because of the situation, you experience the emotion of fear. Conversely, if you were in a joyful setting like a concert, the same arousal might be labeled as excitement instead. Schachter and Singer famously demonstrated this through an experiment where participants were injected with epinephrine, a substance that induces arousal. Some participants were informed about the drug's effects, while others were not. They were then placed with a confederate who acted either euphoric or angry. Those unaware of the injection's cause tended to mirror the confederate's emotions, feeling happy or angry depending on the cues, thus showing that contextual interpretation determined the emotional experience. This became a landmark finding in psychology, illustrating that emotions depend not only on what we feel in the body, but also on how we think about those sensations. Schachter's theory deeply influenced later studies of emotion and cognition, forming the foundation for modern appraisal theories and emotion regulation research. His insights paved the way for understanding how labeling emotions can help manage them, an idea central to contemporary therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy. By teaching individuals to recognize and reframe emotional responses, psychologists today still apply Schachter's principle that emotion is a powerful fusion of body and mind. His work remains a cornerstone in explaining how humans interpret their inner world through the lens of thought and context. A 2002 study conducted by the American Psychological Association ranked Stanley Schachter as the 7th most eminent psychologist of the 20th century, based on journal citations, introductions in textbooks, and surveys. Stanley Schachter was born in 1922 in Flushing, New York, and passed away in 1997 in East Hampton, New York, at the age of 75. Neal Miller. American experimental psychologist Neal E. Miller, often regarded as the father of modern behaviorism, occupies a foundational place in the history of psychology. His work bridged behaviorist principles with physiological and cognitive processes, making him one of the first researchers to demonstrate that learning is not purely behavioral but also deeply rooted in biological and emotional mechanisms. Miller began his career during the height of the behaviorist movement, a period dominated by the ideas of B.F. Skinner and John Watson. However, unlike strict behaviorists who focused exclusively on observable actions, Miller believed that internal states, such as motivation, fear, and emotion, played an essential role in shaping behavior. This multidimensional approach positioned him as a bridge between classical behaviorism and later cognitive psychology. One of Miller's landmark contributions was his research on operant conditioning, a learning process that explains how consequences shape behavior. He argued that the environment plays the primary role in determining how an organism behaves. According to Miller, individuals learn to repeat behaviors that lead to positive outcomes and avoid behaviors that produce negative consequences. This idea formed the basis of his reinforcement theory, a major advancement in behavioral science. In reinforcement theory, positive reinforcement increases desirable behavior by adding a rewarding stimulus, such as praise, approval, or tangible rewards. Miller emphasized that positive reinforcement is far more powerful and effective for long-term behavior change than punishment. Negative reinforcement involves the removal of an unpleasant stimulus to increase a behavior. Miller drew a clear distinction between negative reinforcement and punishment. While negative reinforcement strengthens behavior, punishment aims to decrease it by introducing an adverse consequence. Beyond reinforcement, Miller also made significant contributions to understanding the interaction between biological processes and behavior. His groundbreaking experiments on biofeedback demonstrated that autonomic responses, such as heart rate or blood pressure, could be brought under voluntary control through learning. This challenged long-held assumptions that such functions were automatic and unchangeable, opening new directions in health psychology, stress management, and behavioral medicine. Another important contribution was Miller's cognitive affective model, which integrated emotion and cognition into the study of behavior. He proposed that thoughts, cognitive elements, and feelings, affective elements, jointly influence how individuals behave in specific situations. Emotions, in particular, serve as powerful motivators. Fear can drive avoidance, while positive emotion can sustain goal-directed behavior. By acknowledging the role of internal psychological processes, Miller helped pave the way for cognitive behavioral approaches that dominate modern therapy and education. Neal Miller's legacy lies in his ability to synthesize behaviorism with physiological and cognitive insights. A 2002 study conducted by the American Psychological Association ranked Neal Miller as the 8th most eminent psychologist of the 20th century based on journal citations, introductions in textbooks, and surveys. Neal E. Miller was born in 1909 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and passed away in 2002 in Hamden, Connecticut, at the age of 92. Edward Thorndike. American psychologist Edward L. Thorndike is widely regarded as one of the founding figures of modern behavioral psychology. His pioneering research laid the foundations for much of what we understand today about learning, motivation, and the relationship between actions and their consequences. Thorndike's work, grounded in rigorous experimentation and the scientific study of behavior, transformed psychology from a largely philosophical discipline into an empirical and measurable science. Thorndike is best known for his theory of connectionism, one of the earliest systematic models of learning. According to this theory, learning occurs through the formation of associations between stimuli and responses. When an organism is placed in a situation and responds to a stimulus, the outcome of that response strengthens or weakens the connection. Over time, these repeated experiences create stable behavioral patterns. Thorndike's famous puzzle box experiments with cats beautifully illustrated this process. As the cats learned to escape the box by performing specific actions, their responses became faster and more accurate with each trial. From his work on connectionism emerged the influential law of effect, which states that behaviors followed by satisfying outcomes are more likely to be repeated, while behaviors followed by unpleasant outcomes are less likely to recur. This principle introduced the core idea of reinforcement, which would later become an essential component of operant conditioning and modern behavior therapy. Thorndike expanded his ideas further in what became known as instrumental conditioning, a theory closely related to operant conditioning, but distinct in its emphasis on the learner's active role. In instrumental conditioning, organisms learn to perform behaviors that bring desired outcomes and avoid those that lead to negative results. Reinforcement and punishment play central roles, shaping future behavior through systematic consequences. Thorndike's careful experimental work provided the groundwork later built upon by B.F. Skinner and other prominent behaviorists. Another significant contribution from Thorndike was his theory of problem solving, rooted in trial and error learning. He argued that organisms do not solve problems through reasoning or sudden insight, but by attempting multiple responses until one leads to success. Over time, responses that result in favorable outcomes are strengthened, and errors gradually fade. This approach helped redefine problem solving as a behavioral process rather than a purely cognitive one, influencing educational psychology and instructional design for decades to come. Beyond his theoretical contributions, Thorndike also played a major role in the development of educational psychology. He studied how students learn, how skills develop, and how teaching methods can be optimized. A 2002 study conducted by the American Psychological Association ranked Edward Thorndike as the 9th most eminent psychologist of the 20th century, based on journal citations, introductions in textbooks, and surveys. Edward Thorndike was born in 1874 in Williamsburg, Massachusetts, and passed away in 1949 in Montrose, New York, at the age of 74. Abraham Maslow. American psychologist Abraham H. Maslow stands as one of the most influential figures in humanistic psychology, a movement that emphasizes individual potential, personal growth, and the inherent goodness of human beings. His work marked a shift away from the pathology-driven focus of psychoanalysis and behaviorism, offering instead an optimistic perspective on human motivation. Maslow's most celebrated contribution is his hierarchy of needs, a theory that remains a cornerstone in psychology, education, business, and personal development. Maslow believed that human beings are naturally driven to grow, evolve, and reach their highest potential, a process he called self-actualization. To understand how individuals progress toward this state, he proposed that human motivation is structured in a series of levels, each representing different types of needs that must be met for healthy psychological development. These needs form a hierarchy, often wrongly illustrated as a pyramid, with fundamental needs at the base and growth-oriented needs at the top. Actually, Maslow never drew or promoted the idea as a geometric pyramid. His original writings, especially in Motivation and Personality, referred to the hierarchy as a set of stages or a gradual progression, not a rigid pyramid structure. At the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy are physiological needs, the essential requirements for sustaining life. These include food, water, air, sleep, and basic bodily functioning. Maslow argued that when individuals struggle for survival, all other needs become secondary until these basic conditions are satisfied. Once physiological needs are met, the next layer becomes prominent: safety and security needs. These include protection from physical harm, stability, health, shelter, and financial security. Maslow recognized that humans require predictability and structure in their environment to feel safe enough to pursue deeper emotional and psychological fulfillment. The third level of the hierarchy, love and belonging, reflects the fundamentally social nature of human life. These needs include close relationships, family bonds, friendships, romantic partnerships, and a sense of acceptance within a community. Maslow believed that emotional connection is critical to psychological well-being, and that isolation or loneliness can significantly hinder personal development. When love and belonging are present, individuals seek to satisfy their esteem needs, which involve self-respect, competence, recognition, and the feeling that one's efforts matter. Maslow divided esteem into two forms: the esteem one gains from others, status, appreciation, recognition, and the esteem one gains from oneself, confidence, mastery, independence. At the peak of the hierarchy is self-actualization, the desire to fulfill one's highest potential and live authentically. Maslow described self-actualization as a process of becoming the person one is meant to be: creative, purpose-driven, morally grounded, and deeply engaged with life. A 2002 study conducted by the American Psychological Association ranked Abraham Maslow as the 10th most eminent psychologist of the 20th century based on journal citations, introductions in textbooks, and surveys. Abraham H. Maslow was born in 1908 in Brooklyn, New York, and passed away in 1970 in Menlo Park, California, at the age of 62.